Trump's PR offensive on his broken wall promise. Trump scrambling with Democrats, standing tough, and more signs Republicans are cracking on day 17 of the Trump shutdown. Trump announcing today he will address the nation from the Oval Office for the first time tomorrow, and he will visit the border on Thursday, saying it is a humanitarian and national security crisis. This is a crisis for Trump's wall talking points and the Rush Limbaugh base he was scared by. Here are the facts. A Homeland Security chart showing the number of apprehensions of undocumented immigrants at the southern border. You can see a massive decline over 18 years with an 11% jump between 2017 and last year. In the last 8 years, we've seen some of the lowest numbers in history. Now Trump is shifting his posture on the wall. Watch this.
We have to build a wall. We're going to build a wall. We're going to build a big, beautiful wall. Steel slats. We don't use the word wall necessarily. Great border security with a wall or a slat fence or whatever you want to call it. I informed my folks to say that we'll build a steel barrier. Steel. It'll be made out of steel.
What is it? That's the question. Democrats are upping the pressure, planning to block all bills until Mitch McConnell ends this shutdown. With me now is Mark Thompson, radio host of Sirius XM's Make It Plain show, and Nick Confessori, political reporter for the New York Times. Nick, I'll start with you on this one. I feel as if this shutdown is literally a reality show, it seems, from the announcement to visiting the border to the address from the Oval Office that we're going to hear about tomorrow night. The issue here is this is a reality show where lives are at stake, and as of Friday, people aren't going to get paid anymore. I mean, if the Trump administration was actually a PR company, they would be doing quite well right now. But in fact, they're running a country, and we are nearing the longest government shutdown in history if this continues on over the weekend.
Well, what's happening here is that the crisis that is being created because of the shutdown is going to far outweigh the crisis at the border, which is not a security crisis, but a humanitarian crisis. The government's own statistics show that terrorists are coming in through airports, not through the southern border. And yet we're going to have worse security at airports because DHS workers are walking out because they aren't getting paid. We are now, right now, captive to the president's idea of himself. If the president went out tomorrow and said, look, I just want some border security money, let's figure out the details, he'd have a deal in an hour. But he wants to say he built a wall, and Democrats refuse to let him say he built a wall, even though everyone kind of supports having some kind of a barrier and some kind of security.
Mark, who is the president trying to address in this Oval Office address that's coming tomorrow night? Who does he want to hear his appeal tomorrow evening?
The very still gullible base that he intends to distract from the story you teased out earlier, what's going on with Mueller and the whole Intelligence Committee. He made a fool out of himself. He promised a wall. Mexico would build a wall. Now we're down to steel slats made of steel. And he doesn't have it. So he's even saying to this base, we've heard him say that part of the wall is already done. Nobody knows what he's talking about. Sarah Sanders is going on television quoting the Longfellow poem about Paul Revere. The immigrants are coming, one by land, two by sea. All of this is truly made up. But what he may do tomorrow night may very well, we may see for the first time the intersection between the Willie Horton strategy and the WMD strategy, because coming after immigrants the way he does is nothing but racial fear-mongering. And then just like WMD, creating this national emergency where there isn't one, there is no crisis. That's what we have.
Well, it's good that you bring that up, sort of this national emergency, that there isn't one, because oftentimes when you hear about a president, Nick, giving an Oval Office address, it's because of a national emergency, right? You think about George W. Bush when he gave some of his Oval Office addresses. One of those was after the September 11th terror attack, where he gave an Oval Office address. I think many of us remember that Oval Office address. President Barack Obama, after the British petroleum oil spill, he gave an Oval Office address as well. The president is trying to create an emergency here when there isn't necessarily an emergency. And we're going to have Julia Ainsley on later on in the show to talk about the numbers of the people that are actually crossing the border and who is actually being apprehended at the border. When you have Sarah Huckabee Sanders going on Fox News and saying we are apprehending terrorists at the border. In fact, that's not the case. It's not the border, as you said. It's at the airport.
Well, this is a bid, first of all, to claim or try to claim some of the gravitas of the Oval Office in this setting. You saw his press conference this week. It was a disaster. It was a word salad. And what they want to do is put him on a camera in the Oval Office with some prepared remarks to get on message and get back on their message, which is there's a crisis here. It's an important emergency. There are people coming through the border. Watch out. Be afraid. That's their message. But the issue they have here is that the crisis here is one they've created. The person who wants the wall the most is the president. And he's saying, I'm not going to move on your government until I get my wall. That's a losing proposition for his party in the long term.
What do you think, Mark, the president is gaining by putting so much attention at the border and on this immigration crisis that he's saying it is, this immigration crisis, and taking away from what's happening within the government right now?
I don't think he's gaining anything because history has shown, shutdowns have never worked out for those who perpetrated them. I mean, Gingrich got ridden out of town in the shutdowns of the 90s. I think he's fooling himself. Look back at the caravan. That was supposed to have been an emergency, and everybody was coming on this caravan. That went away, and it definitely didn't help in the midterms. So I don't see...
But he wants to make it seem like he's giving in by saying steel slats. He's saying, look, I'm giving it to the Democrats because they don't necessarily want a concrete wall. They just want steel slats. It seems like they like steel better, as he said on the South Lawn yesterday afternoon.
But that won't work as long as the government is shut down. The majority of the American people blame him for the shutdown. He's the one acting like the spoiled child, so he can go to slats, fence, whatever he wants to call it. As long as the government is shut down, he's going to pay a price for it.
Go ahead.
What you're seeing here is I think the president and his team are trying to back into a win. Because guess what? There are already steel slats on the border. There is already a fence on parts of the border and a wall on parts of the border and surveillance on parts of the border. The border is protected, and the big thing is propounded is not true, which is that there's some kind of a open border on the south there. And now what's happening is that there is some kind of refurbishment of the steel slats in some places. You could claim that's already happening, but I think he's trying to get himself to something that's already there so he can call it a wall and walk away and say, I won.
All right, I want to bring in Democratic Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton of D.C. Congresswoman, thanks so much for joining us this evening. Very much appreciate it. I first want to get your reaction to the president announcing that he's going to be giving an address from the Oval Office tomorrow evening at 9 p.m. What do you want to hear from the president tomorrow night?
Well, first, let me indicate what the significance of this address is. If you look at the polls, the president is losing. He's going to give the address because he's trying to get the American people where they are not now. And one way to understand this is to see the wall crumbling around him. For example, maybe not enough people care about Section 8 housing, where people get a third of their housing from the federal government, or even food stamps. But the president has already caved on IRS funding, and guess what? He can't. You can't pick and choose. We'll give you back your IRS funding, but we won't do your housing funding. That's what he's trying to do now. That money would have to come out of the general fund. The wall with IRS funding may be the biggest crack yet in the wall. We've got to stop talking about the wall as if that is some kind of metaphor. Let's look at what, in fact, we're talking about. The sides are nowhere near far apart. When I taught as a tenured professor of law, if I put some first-year law students, they would see all of the elements on the table for a compromise. The Democrats and the Republicans aren't far away at all, and the president himself is stop using the word wall, and he's saying essentially call it what you may. With the IRS funding, I think we're going to begin to see the president do what he is doing tonight, and that is to try to shore up even his own base and certainly the American people who have long left him on the question of the wall.
Congresswoman, the president said that he can understand the plight of federal workers that aren't going to be receiving paychecks come January 11th. These people that are living paycheck to paycheck, some of which are getting paid $500 every time they see that paycheck. And now they don't necessarily know how they're going to be able to pay their rent or keep their lights on, and they're going to have to choose which to do. Do you buy it from the president that he understands this plight? Do you think the president understands the plight of these federal workers that are not going to be getting paid because of this government shutdown as so far as it goes on?
Well, these federal workers all over the country, I have a good number of them in my own city and in this region. He doesn't care beans about them. He doesn't even talk about them very much because he recognizes that that is, and he calls them Democrats, that's a small number of them. That's why I'm looking now to the spreading to the economy, to the spreading to other sectors, because the federal workers won't do it and haven't done it and couldn't possibly do it by themselves. But as you see this begin to have its effect on the economy itself, and that's what you're beginning to see, the president is going to be forced, and I agree with my other colleagues, to use what is already up there to say, look, I won. We're back to normal.
We know that the president has, how do I say this, not necessarily told the truth when it comes to the border wall and when it comes to immigration. He's put a lot of numbers out there that have been disproven, to say the least. I want to play for you some of that, and then we'll talk.
You have a tremendous medical problem coming into a country, communicable disease. Tremendous problems. People don't want to talk about it. Remember drugs. The drugs are pouring into this country. They don't go through the ports of entry.
Wrong after wrong after wrong. I mean, it is astounding the fact that the president puts these numbers out there and says these types of things that can then be fact-checked publicly. Mark, I'll go with you on this one. Why does the president consistently do this sort of thing?
Well, because, frankly, he has his own television network that enables it, and a particular host on there that enables it. So I think that helps him do it. And his base is willing to be gullible in that regard. You know, we look at what's happening with the farmers. I think they're even affected by it. They're already affected by the tariffs. But yet these are some people who still support him even through the shutdown. It's again, people acting against their own interests.
Nick, the fact is, a case can be made for the situation at the border. A case can be made for changes that need to be made to immigration in this country without creating falsehoods. And it seems that the president doesn't necessarily understand that the cases can be made without saying the things that he goes on to say.
Well, he isn't making it. Look, I think a lot of Americans support immigration. It's part of our tradition. People don't like broken immigration. And people don't like people, kind of crossing the border illegally. There are solutions to that problem, but the problem is getting better. The problem for him as a politician is his entire career is based on the argument that it's getting worse. So you can't campaign on immigration as a national security crisis if the facts are, actually, it's pretty much under control. There's a problem we got to deal with here, and the dreamers are here, and that has to be settled. If your argument is that it's actually a terrible problem, what do? You amp up the rhetoric that they're vectors of disease and crime and drug smuggling. You can go back to his very first speech as a candidate in Trump Tower and find him hitting all of those notes.
Yeah. Congresswoman, last to you on this. Do you think it's smart that the Democrats hold out till the very end, till the president bends on this?
Yeah, the Democrats have looked at the polls. They also see how vulnerable the president is on it, and they see him now trying to get his act together by going on national television. It does seem to me that the face saving is going to come after that. We see the face saving beginning already with the, and I repeat, once people don't get the IRS checks, remember, the government is holding your money. Almost everybody has put in more money in order to get it back. Once you see that begin to happen, that covers the entire, virtually the entire population. You're going to begin to see the effects on the economy well beyond our talking about the wall and the rest. And that is what is going to bring this down. Not the wall, not even a compromise. The compromise is already there for any fool to pick up and do.
All right, Mark Thompson, Nick Confessori, and Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, thank you guys all.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.